trying again. Let's see what we got. See if we got a better quality this time. Quality and size. Alright, that looks better on my end. Now, I do have to join a Zoom meeting. So while I'm playing, I'll be listening to a CPA boot camp. But that doesn't start till noon, so that's almost an hour away. But in the meantime, we'll do a little racing. I might as well get this bit out of the way. No, just go online. Open racing. I must have not been on. We got going on. B Street Racing. I had pretty good luck with my BRZ. So we'll go back to it. I do think I am lacking on top end speed. Not the best car I've built. Although, I am building them better all the time. Most of these paint jobs are paint jobs I've done, copied. They are available, so you can download them. I haven't put a lot of my builds up there, but if I do get some comments and they want to have, if somebody wants to have a build that I specifically have seen race, send me a message, put a comment, and I'll upload a build, and I'll put your name in the description. Not necessarily planned, but it was the corner anyway. Oh, no, hit the tree and we're good. Ooh, that was one hell of a slide. See if I hold on. Usually I choke. Nailing it. A little fast in that corner. Every bit of the road and then some. It took us real slidey in the transitions. I probably should work on fixing that. Alright, well, that was unexpected, but I will take it. Yeah, 12 usually does pretty good. They're pretty good when I race them. Bad enough to usually kick my ass. Oh, got another race. 6 points behind the BM1. I could get on the podium overall. And provided I win and he finishes third or worse. What race we got? What race we got? Nice. This is where I'll find out how much I'm lacking in top speed. Last time we took a hell of a shortcut to get ahead of everybody, so this time we didn't have that shortcut. Oh my god, it's still faster. good recovery. Guess Tuesday morning there's not a lot of high quality competition just yet. Ouch. Indecision. All right. Let's see how I did. Let's see. Alright, there we go. Oh, I did. What do you know? Alright, that's one road. I suppose I should try my super fast. It's a work in progress. Normally I use my GT, which is pretty good. But I did want to try improving on this. So let's get a feel for it. Take a quick look at stream settings. Okay. Could have swore I painted up those rims. Test of my abilities. Nothing's X coming good cars. The Hurricane's a good car. I've seen people successful with the Vet, but that's not built. 92 Porsche. Let's see how we do. AMG GT Black. Better. Oh, but they got the handling on me. I don't have the handling. Ooh. Bumping and grinding, bumping and grinding. Oh. Oh, I didn't see a GT. If I can get a handle on this guy now. What the fuck? Get beside me and turn left? I don't think I did anything to deserve that. At least nothing intentional. Check my Xbox messages. Ooh. They're gonna work on the handle on this guy. Overall drivability. I don't think I did terrible. Alright, what beat me? GT and the Hurricane. Not bad. I wonder who drove me into the wall. Certainly looked intentional, that's for sure. Not a very tight handling car. I have company, I'll be back. Alright, nothing important. Alright. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The Xbox. Let's check the message. Alright, no message requested. We seem to be stuck in a loop something. Oh, there we go. Marigold. One of my less familiar tracks. Ouch. Oh, I thought I was gonna get hit, so I missed the marker. That's right, give me a little bit of clean room. Play with the car a little bit better. Over behind me. This is the content of this car. Or at least my abilities with this car. That was pathetic. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Missed that marker. Should have been up there around third. All of my own fault. Alright, one more race. I wonder if I can change that in the middle. See if that changes over there. Oh yeah, I guess it does. I can do different parts of different screens. I have to play with that some. I like that. I guess I can always go back to the FXX. That's one. Hoping to get another Ferrari to be as good. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Right? Push me out of the way. I hit the wall enough on my own. Let's see. Oh yeah. Now you don't make mistakes. Alright, at least run the end. Alright. Finish off with a fourth. No, it definitely made this car better than what it was. I don't think it could be competitive with rally tires on it though. Maybe. I'll have to check the aero. What I've done with that. Crank up that aero, maybe I can get enough handling to make those corners. Probably wouldn't lose much. Street racing. Alright, let's go ahead and find my GT. And I passed it. There it is. Alright, tunnel or run. I never do well on this course. Oh good, the other GT is still there. Maybe I'll be able to compare my GT to his. get throttle control. Definitely got the handling. Oh, he's battling this GT for a while, so probably. Pushed it too hard. Oh! Oh, a little corner on that wall. Ooh, bug. Too far. Wow, 10 seconds. He's got a good build and can drive. No question about that. All right. Maybe we'll get a little closer. Castillo Dumba. All right, starting next to each other. Oh no, that's another GT. Huh. Big jump in mine. Damn. That's gonna cost me the race. Three wide. I get the power, apparently. So I'm going to come down and navigate in this last corner. I slowed down way too much. Very nice. Oh, that GT didn't do so well. I may have got hung up. Good, that's the competition. Put all the GTs together. That's funny. Alright, let's see how we do.
What?
Oh, I missed it. My fault. Shouldn't have tried to take the inside. Totally my fault. Won't add to the competition this time. Was early on though. Let's see if I can work my way up through a few. So let's try to go to the inside again. Just can't help myself. Shortest way around the track. Woo! Where's he going? Where's he going? Where's he going? There's a shortcut if you can wing it. Can I wing it? I don't know if that was beneficial or not. Mr. Mark, I have to go back first. My guess. Never made that corner if that truck went there. Whew. Close to that tree. Ooh. Eighth it is. Seventh. I'll take it. Wow, I did so terrible. It still ended up in the top 3 overall. That's impressive. Diablo. Gotta be Main Street. Let's see. I should probably go take a look. Oh, back and safe. Okay, good, good, good. Okay, let's see. That's funny. Oh. Guess we'll go right in the same car. Apparently they wanted to try again. Well, I definitely can't say that I didn't have an advantage where I started. Probably should have paid attention to what races was. I do know this race. Somebody on my butt. That might slow down a little too much. Ooh, not enough. That wall's gonna kill me. No. I think he's a good driver. Ooh, I did manage to get up. I wonder if there was contact in the back that slowed people up. A little much. A minute. 10 up there plugged in. My meeting will start as soon as it starts. Oh, the Lotus. Those three were neck and neck. I'm sure there was a lot of contact that allowed me to stay out in front. Riviera. Get out front, easier to stay out front, that's for sure. Poor network conditions. That's not good. What the hell was that? How do we get through this? There we go, a little push. A little bump draft, get me going, get by some of these cars. Oh, into the wall, that hurt. I'm toast now. First to last. I didn't even miss a marker. What am I doing? Can't be looking at my phone at the same time. That was cleanly on both of our parts, that's good. Where did he go? Gave me another position. That was nice of him. Alright, let's see. Who was this? Yeah. All right. Those stats, I'll have to make sure I'm muted on that end. That's good. Should catch it between races. Should. My luck, my mic will be on. They'll hear the racing. Oh, they're connecting now. Interesting.
Everybody in here.
All right, welcome, folks. We're going to begin in about 5 minutes, and we'll let some more folks join online. And we really appreciate you coming to our boot camp today. But we understand there was a little bit of confusion about an email that somehow got into people's email boxes today, even though it was sent yesterday. We're sorry about that, but the boot camp is indeed happening, and we'll start in about 4 minutes.
Nice. These usually don't start perfectly on time. Bill Harrington. How do I know that name? All right. The back of the pack.
Just as a reminder, folks, I know there's going to be an option to toggle cameras and microphones off, but we're asking folks if you'll notice I'm taking cameras and microphones off and I see them pop up. We're going to try to run this like a webinar, and we'll have plenty of opportunity for Q&A in the second half of this, but I just ask to keep your cameras off. If you need to message me for any reason about the presentation, you can use the chat function to send me a message.
Oh. Yeah, whale. Look at that, right to the back. That was poor judgment on my part.
It looks like we've got about 70 people in climbing, Stuart, so yeah, pretty good turnout today.
Great. Welcome, folks. We'll start in about 2 minutes. And as I heard Chase say, we're having folks keep their cameras off until the Q&A section when we'll call on folks to ask questions.
Cameras. Why do we leave cameras off?
The screen nice and clean for everyone to see the presentation. Turn your video and
All
off.
right. I guess that makes sense.
We'll prompt you to ask questions in the second hour of the presentation. So beginning in about a minute or so.
At least maybe I had a showing on my lap time. We'll see. 43. No, I did not. Oof. Going to my lap time, I finished right where I should have been, 6th. The other two GTs are 42.6. Number 20 MG.
All right, we've passed 100 people. We do have over 200 people that registered for this event today, so we'll see how many of them come in the next couple minutes here. But we might want to give a couple minutes before we start proper start because we've still got people coming in.
A street. Oh yeah, I just worked in my.
And once again, for anybody that missed this message, apologies if you got a confusing email that said the webinar was starting tomorrow. I sent that email yesterday afternoon. I'm not entirely sure why some folks are receiving it this morning and getting very confused over when the timing of this is, but we're pleased to see that most of you figured out that it was happening today, so that's great. But again, sorry for any confusion there. We're not really sure what happened because that was just an email we tried sending folks. I got you, Stuart.
Introduction to the coalition.
Oh, yeah, okay. You can't. We gotta resend whatever you just turned on because you're controlling my whole computer now.
Gotcha. That's something you. Oh, stop remote control. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and you unmuted me. All right, great.
Lost
Back here. Chase, will you put the slides back to the front? I've lost control of the slides.
Here you go. That should.
All right.
Should be all set.
I'm still seeing. There we go. All right. Excellent. All right, so we'll begin now. I think we've got all our technical issues resolved, and thank you all for joining us. And Chase is going to start a recording now so we can put this on our website.
Recording in progress.
All right, folks, welcome to our CPA boot camp. We have over 130 people on the line now, and we've got folks who are CPA administrators. We had 25 administrators registered. We had lots of municipal staff online. We have a great mix today of people who've been on their CPC for a very short period of time, less than a year. And then we have about twice as many veterans, folks who've been on their CPC for a lot longer. So we have, believe it or not, 127 different communities that registered for today's boot camp. So a great response. And we will have this on our website up in a few days. And we'll send you an email and let you know that the recording is ready to be viewed by everybody. All right, so let me give you a quick perspective of what we're going to do today for the boot camp. First, I'll give you a quick introduction to the coalition, and we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Stuart Saginaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Preservation Coalition, and you'll see Chase Mack pop up periodically, particularly in our Q&A session. Chase is our Communications Director. I'm going to talk a little bit about CPA from a high-level perspective. We'll talk about allowable uses, which I think dominates probably 80% of the technical assistance questions we get on CPAs about allowable uses. And then we'll talk about some best practices, the most popular questions we get that folks should be reminded about. We'll go for about an hour here with the formal presentation, maybe a little less, probably not more. And then we'll stay on the line till 2 o'clock. And folks who have questions will be able to raise their hand. Chase will unmute you, and we can stay and answer any questions you might have throughout the presentation. All right, so let's quickly start the presentation with a little bit about our organization, the Community Preservation Coalition. And we are, sorry about that. Okay, great. So our website, communitypreservation.org, has lots of information, and you'll particularly find this presentation on our CPA Bootcamp page, which is in our technical assistance section. For those of you that are new to a CPC, we did this bootcamp a couple of years ago. It was a more basic version, I guess, for lack of a better term. That was CPA 101. Today we're going to review a few of those things, but we're also really going to get into some more of the finer points of running a CPA. So I guess today's is 201. The one on our website is 101. So if you're new to a CPA community and a CPC, you might want to go check out that CPA 101 boot camp that's on our website. Chase, would you hit the next slide? I'm having trouble controlling the slides, unfortunately. All right, so our website has a terrific technical assistance section. We've circled it in red here, and that's really for you folks. If you're on a CPC or helping to administer a CPC or working for a municipality that has a CPC, this technical assistance section has literally dozens of articles curated on virtually every CPA topic. And you'll see the webinars that I just talked about. The page with the training webinars is circled in red there on the left-hand side. If you have a question on CPA, this is a great place to start. And if not, you give us a call, and we're happy to help you with any questions you might have on CPA. Next slide. All right, our organization, the Community Preservation Coalition, we're a nonprofit based in Boston, for those of you that are just getting to know us a little bit. And we do all the things that a typical municipal trade association does. I think probably our two most popular things that we do and that folks recognize is our technical assistance. We do both email and telephone technical assistance from Monday through Thursday. We're happy to answer your questions. And then also, I think probably, I think our most valuable service is our advocacy and our work on Beacon Hill. It's no accident that our office is about a block from the State House. We spend a lot of time up there talking with legislators about changes that might make CPA more beneficial. And also, unfortunately, sometimes we have to talk about and educate legislators on some changes they want to make to CPA that would not be beneficial for the existing community. So we spend a lot of time on Beacon Hill doing those changes. Our steering committee comes from these 6 organizations, as well as 8 members from CPA communities, either administrators or people on the CPC. We have some at-large members. There are 21 folks who guide the coalition's budget and our priorities that we work on, our legislative priorities that we're going to advocate for. And this organization of steering committee members meets quarterly. We are considering changing that structure a little bit. 21 members of a big steering committee, and so we're thinking of maybe reducing that a little bit. This is something our strategic plan that we just completed last year identified as a possible way to broaden our reach, is to reduce the size of the formal steering committee and create a much larger advisory council open to folks in every CPA community. This advisory council maybe would meet twice a year, maybe 3 times a year, all by Zoom. And so we want to get your feedback on whether you think this is a good idea and whether you would be willing to possibly serve on advisory council. We're going to spend the next couple months kind of structuring this. So there's a poll that just popped up on your screen, and we'll give you a couple seconds to just answer this question as to whether you'd be interested in participating on an organization like this. And if we get enough interest, we're going to restructure the way we govern ourselves and get more input from you folks on advisory council. So these polls, we have a couple of these sprinkled throughout today's presentation. And we'll close the poll right now and see if folks like this idea. Chase, what did folks say here? All right, so we have a bunch of people. 29% of 150 is plenty of people to run an advisory board. So we'll structure that. We'll let folks know how it works and get back to you and watch for more information on that. All right, moving on. Next slide, Chase. So any way you look at the program, CPA, it's been a huge success. We have 196 cities and towns that are in this program. So over half the communities in the state. We've gotten a lot of cities in the last decade, so that's pushed the population that lives in a CPA community above 70%. The last statistic you're seeing on the screen is the one I love the most. Every community that has ever adopted CPA has found the program incredibly useful and has stayed in the program. You can revoke it after you've had it for 5 years. It's been on the ballot 4 times to do that in 23 years. And in all four cases, including one very recently, actually, the community said, nope, we like this surcharge. We're willing to pay the small surcharge, and we want CPA to continue. So that's a great testimony to the program. This map is a visual representation of those 196 communities. The green are the towns that have CPA. The orange are the cities.
Beverly.
And you'd think that maybe after, nice. 23 years or 24 years of having CPA, everyone who would want the program would have already adopted it. But that's not the case. We still see a ton of interest in adopting CPA among the communities in white that don't have it. And we have 8 already that voted at town meeting or city council this past spring to put CPA on the ballot. So those 8 communities you see there with the little stars will all be voting on the presidential ballot for CPA. And there's still 3 more communities that are actually collecting signatures to put it on the ballot. There's 2 ways you can put CPA on the ballot. Town meeting or the city council can put it on the ballot, or 5% of the registered voters signing a petition can put it on the ballot. And we have 3 communities that are still working through that process. So we may end up with anywhere from 8 to 11 communities on the ballot this coming November. So still a tremendous amount of interest in CPA. All right, so let's dive into the money piece. And it's apropos that when we talked about the tremendous popularity of CPA, we talk about the money because they're interrelated. And the money flows to the communities, and the more communities there are, obviously, the more pieces of pie there have to be served on the CPA trust fund distribution every November. So let's talk about that a little bit. CPA has 2 main revenue sources. Of course, your local CPA surcharge revenue. That's the biggest funding source for every CPA community. You folks decided at some point in the past 23 years what kind of surcharge you wanted. We have 2 communities at 0.5%, a large number of communities at 1 and 1.5% local surcharge, and then we have about 65 or 70 communities that are at a 3%, which is the maximum surcharge. Most of those communities adopted a long time ago. It's very rare to find a 3% surcharge nowadays. The economy is a little bit different. Sometimes small communities do that, but by and large, 1 to 1.5% is a sweet spot for new communities adopting CPA these days. The second funding source is a trust fund that was created by the CPA legislation and is dedicated to funding CPA. So that trust fund is something we're going to talk more about in the next few slides, but I call it the magic of CPA because it really is terrific to have a dedicated trust fund like that. Communities do earn interest on your CPA fund. A lot of you, most of you, have money in the bank that from previous years that you haven't spent, money in reserve accounts. That money is pooled with the town's free cash, but the city or town is supposed to keep track of how much of the interest they earn on their free cash is attributable to the CPA dollars. And they're supposed to pay that out to you every summer when they close the books on the city or town fiscal year. So it's good to check this. We do sometimes find that folks missed this part of CPA. It never really added up to much because interest rates were so low during most of the 20 years that CPA started out. But in the past couple of years, interest rates have picked up, obviously. And so now we're seeing communities earn some decent amount of money on their savings in the CPA fund. And we want to make sure that those funds are getting into your CPA account every summer. There's a chart on our website from DOR that we just posted that will show you how much interest you've earned on CPA going back, I think, 10 years or so. So let us know if you need to, can't find that on our website. You want to confirm that your community is receiving CPA funds. One slide too far. So let's talk about the trust fund. That is, the thing that makes CPA go round. There's one main funding source for the trust fund, and that's in green on the left-hand side of your screen. When CPA was signed by Governor Cellucci in 2000, it created a new fee at every registry of deed across the state. Whenever you record a document at a registry, I think there's 26 registries in the state, you step to the window and you have a deed to record, or a mortgage, or an orders of conditions from the conscom for your new deck. When you go to record that at the registry, there's a chart that shows you how much you have to pay to the state to record that document. I think deeds are $225, for example. I think a mortgage is $175. $50 of that fee on every document filed at the registry, most documents, I should say, goes to the CPA trust fund. And it is a true trust fund. It goes from the window at the registry when it's collected right to the Department of Revenue. It's deposited in the CPA trust fund, and the only thing statutorily that can be done with that money is to be paid out by DOR as a match to the 196 CPA communities every November. Most documents are $50. Municipal lien certificates, for some reason, I don't know why, but those have always been less. Those are $25. Now, when CPA was first passed, the fees were actually 20 and 10. $20 for documents and $10 for municipal lien certificates. And it stayed that way from 2000 until 2019. So we already had lost about $9 to inflation. And we saw the decline of the trust fund as early as 2007 and started talking with the legislature about raising that fee. It's not automatically adjusted to inflation. The legislature doesn't like to set any fees to be automatically adjusted to inflation. So it took until 2019 to get that done, and we finally did and got it raised to $50. Along the way, however, what the legislature said to us is, look, we like CPA. It's not the right time to raise the fee yet. But starting in 2012, they agreed to give us money from the state budget surplus, if it was there, and put that into the trust fund before the distribution was made in November. That is not an automatic. The green part of our revenue is automatic. The red requires about 6 months of tough advocacy work, competing with all the other folks that want to squeeze their way into the state budget. It begins in the spring and runs right through the fall. It's hard. You know, you're going up against other funds that are all competing for the same $50 billion or so that the state has to distribute. Unfortunately, the red funding source is in trouble right now because the state budget is in trouble. There will be no surplus. There wasn't last year either. The year before, we did receive $20 million, which was great. Over the years, we've received well over $120 million in 9 of the last 13 years. But I think we're not going to get it next year, and then hopefully the state will be in better shape and we'll begin receiving those surplus funds again. But definitely a time when the Registry of Deeds money is down, and the perfect storm of the state budget not being flush with cash right now has created a little bit of a lull in the CPA trust fund. So collections are down through April about 10%. We just got May's numbers yesterday, and they were about flat, but it brought the year-to-date down to about an 8.5% reduction. So it's getting better. Believe it or not, a year ago, the month-to-month over the previous year was down by over 30%. So this is actually heading in the right direction at least. But you know, that reduction in real estate activity, you know, there are very few homes on the market. No one is refinancing right now. Interest rates are high, and back when interest rates were low, people were refinancing very often. Each of those generated that fee for the CPA trust fund. So refinancings are a big part of the money flowing into our trust fund. Real estate activity down, no surplus funds. So you've kind of got a perfect storm of an ebb in the CPA trust fund match right now. DOR is projecting a 14.4% base match. Communities that are at 3% will get higher than that. When we say 14.4%, what we mean is 14.4% of what each community receives locally. So Boston is our biggest CPA community. I think they have well over $25 million a year in local surcharge revenue. If that 14.4% holds for this November, Boston will receive a check for 14.4% of $25 million. Our smallest CPA community is Gosnell. Probably not too many folks have heard of. We had a poll now. We can ask you, have you heard of Gosnell? And when I do this in person, I get very few people that raise their hands. But it's the set of islands, the Elizabeth Islands, next to Martha's Vineyard. That's the town of Gosnell. They receive $10,000 a year in CPA funding. So if the 14.4% holds, they will receive 14.4% of $10,000. So that's how we talk about the trust fund match. And that's low. You know, it's probably about half of the minimum we would like to see. 30% is really a nice, robust match. I don't think it'll ever get much higher than that. CPA has grown too large. You know, all the CPA communities combined generate about $250 million in local surcharge money every year. So that's a big match. You know, it used to be 100% many years ago. That would require $250 million a year. So that's not going to happen. But we would like to see the legislature, and we will be working with them in the coming years to get that number up. And 30% would be our target for increasing the trust fund and a minimum match that we would like to see. Chase, next slide. Okay. We want to now dive into what we spend the vast majority of our technical assistant time doing, which is the allowable uses on CPA. And there are two categories of CPA funding. We have administrative expenses and project expenses. And they are very different buckets. They do not mix, and they have different rules for them. So it's very important to think of these two categories of funding very separately. You can't use administrative expenses on projects. You know, once you've been given a budget by the legislative body, you can't supplement that budget with things you forgot about from the administrative expenses. On the other hand, projects represent 95% of the money. Administrative expenses, you can allocate up to 5%. You can't use some of that 95% to allocate more administrative expenses. Those are limited to 5% of your annual revenue. So very important to think of these two funding sources separately, because they have different rules. So let's talk about the administrative funds first. The account that is the CPC administrative account is for the expenses of running the Community Preservation Committee. It is not the general administrative account for the CPA program in your city or town. There is no administrative account or funding source for the general operation of your CPA program. So if your town or city staff spends time on CPA, and certainly the tax collector collects the surcharge, the town clerk puts your warrant articles on the warrant, the selectmen might debate your warrant articles and talk about them, administrative staff works on projects, implement them, those are all part of their normal job for the city or town. And they cannot charge their time to your administrative account. As a matter of fact, the only staff person that can charge expenses to the administrative account, their time and salary, is the CPC administrator, someone who works for the CPC to run the committee. And so the most popular use of administrative funds is to hire a new staff person, whether it's part-time or a contract person, or upping someone who's part-time with the town or city and adding to their hours. That's okay. And we have about 2/3 of our communities that have some type of administrative support. Very few have full-time folks. Mostly it's part-time. The other thing that we see for administrative expenses is any due diligence expenses. You need an appraisal when you're buying land, consultants if you have a legal question, advertising for your public hearings. CPA requires two ads a year for your annual public hearing. That can be charged to the administrative account. But again, it is not to supplement project expenses and things you forgot about on the project budget. And you can't reimburse municipal staff for any time they spend working on CPA projects. So now let's talk about project funds. So the CPA legislation actually says nothing about who can apply for CPA project funds. But some common themes have emerged. And I see one person has raised their hand. Richard, we're going to do questions in the second half of the presentation. So we'll make sure to get to your question. So project funds, the themes we see, the two main folks who apply for CPA funds are public entities, meaning the city or town themselves. I suppose the state could apply for CPA funds. I think there have been one or two small projects on DCR property, for example. And private nonprofit organizations. Those are the two largest applicants to the CPA fund. But again, the CPA doesn't specifically say yes or no to anyone. But there are some types of organizations that you want to do a lot more due diligence on and be very careful. They're okay in most cases, but you want to really follow some good best practices. So the first is an organization that is not incorporated. So the Friends of Johnson Park or the Smith Street Neighborhood Association. And they don't have a tax ID number, they don't have a bank account, and they're not a incorporated entity. It's almost impossible to give an organization like that any CPA funding because every city or town needs a tax ID number and information to be able to cut a check. So you're not going to give a check to Mary, who runs the neighborhood association, and have her deposit it in her personal account. So that's a really tough one. When you sometimes might get applications from a privately owned historic building, usually a commercial building right downtown, and certainly those buildings contribute tremendously to the fabric of New England communities with their ornate facades. But there's a proper way to do that. You want to make sure that it's something that's publicly visible and probably protected by a preservation restriction. So some due diligence there. And religious institutions, this was a huge and very popular part of CPA until the town of Acton was sued on separation of church and state issues in the state's anti-aid amendment, which we're going to talk about in a minute. There are still definitely religious institution grants that are happening, but they definitely deserve some close scrutiny and some guidance from your municipal council before you do those. All right, so now let's talk about this anti-aid amendment because it really affects how you do grants for private projects in Massachusetts. There is an amendment to our state constitution called the anti-aid amendment. It's from 1853. It's old. It's been around for a long time. And that amendment actually says that you can't give public funds to a private organization. But it's been interpreted through the court cases in the intervening 170 years or so to mean that you can't give public money to a private organization for private purposes, but you can give public money to a private organization if they are advancing a public purpose. So, an example I'll give is our town is a small town.
Hello there, sir.
We give $3,500 every year.
No work for you on the house in the next couple of days.
No, too hot.
And in turn,
Damn straight.
Working my live feed. I'm also listening to a workshop.
With CPA, it's usually more commonly found on grants.
Drinking my coffee and
historic organizations.
gotta be late for my coffee bucket.
They're historic
late for what?
buildings that are used for.
I'll probably be late for my goddamn doctor's appointment. I didn't realize it's already 12:30. Holy shit.
And you just want to make sure that
Time
you do
keeps
this
a flying.
right, that you find a way to protect
Yeah, I gotta go to the
private organizations. After all,
doctors and then
after you
take
cut
mom
the check,
shopping. Yay.
you're not in control of what happens to that building with that private organization. There are a number of strategies that are on the screen here, and you just want to make sure to have a robust
I
discussion
understand.
with the CCC every time you're giving funds to a private
Make sure you
organization,
bring a
and explaining
large thermos of ice
all right,
water.
so now let's talk a little bit more in depth about CPA allowances.
Like that everywhere I am is gonna be air conditioned, but yes, I have a lot of
This is the most important single slide.
This might not be ice
whatever
water.
you might have it for CPA. The CPA
Fill it with
allowance
ice
chart
now.
was put out by DOR in around 2004.
I know my
so.
my
This is a simplified version.
hot cold cup
We do have the formal DOR
I've,
version on the website.
filled
The
that
only
with ice
difference is the DOR version
and
has
water.
definitions of the
I leave it out in the sun.
But for presentation purposes,
6-7
this is
hours.
the one
Still got plenty of ice
that's
in it.
easy for you folks to use.
Yeah, those things. Those
It is
are great.
the first place you should go whenever you are trying to figure out if a CPA project is eligible. It's pretty obvious that there are 4 categories of CPA, right? It's a restricted fund. Everyone knows the 4 categories are open space, and when we say open space, we mean conservation land, historic preservation, recreation, and affordable housing. But what's lesser known, and was really confusing to a lot of folks until this chart came out, is that it's not every project in those 4 categories that can be funded. it's only projects that can be justified by one of the verbs down the left-hand side. You have to be acquiring something, creating something, preserving, supporting, or rehabilitating. And as you'll see, not every verb is available in every category. So this is hard. You know, the CPA allowable usage chart, when it came out, made it easier, but it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, Woody Harrelson had said Nansen will go into an interview on Conan.
Obvious, you're going to buy conservation land.
And they were late because Harrelson friggin' got into a motorcycle accident on the way.
But a lot of projects are a little bit more opaque to figure
and
out.
Conan was like,
we're going to talk about how to do that right now and give you some tips
you still
on how
coming to the interview?
Determine whether something is allowable or not. So the first thing is
says something about, you know, taking a tumble. Woody Harrelson's like,
when they come into you,
I think a tumble is a fair term. I can go over the handlebars.
Budget, you can't
recounting
really
the embarrassing incident, he explained that he was passing a Tesla on the left
to match
that I thought was moving a little bit slow, but I didn't realize he was moving slow because he was taking a left. Me and Troy just had this conversation the other day about the fucking idiots, the motorcycle drivers, being a
particular allowable use.
It's exactly how I had my accident.
You can't do this if you don't have a budget.
I thought he was going a little bit slow, so I went to pass him on the left, not realizing the reason he was going slow is because he was taking a left.
It's still going to be a rough budget, and that's fine.
That thing called
the budget to be perfect at that point.
Turn signal.
But you need to have a budget to figure out how much
people
money
piss me off when I use the directional. That's a pet peeve of mine.
And
I mean, how hard is it to flick your finger to use the direction to let people know what the hell you're doing? That's the whole point of them. Or the people that'll take a left and then turn the directional on.
But what the money
it's like, hello, it's not there to be an obligation as part of your driving. It's there for a reason.
But what does that mean? Well,
putting it on after you take a left doesn't help you.
Lighting, we want to spend
but it doesn't help the other people on the road, I should say.
Absolutely.
We want to spend $40,000 on new plantings, and $15,000.
I got about
so that would be an example of a budget.
10 to 15 minutes to finish my coffee and get ready.
If they put a line item there, also we will
more than enough
mower to mow the grass.
I'm not sure about that. I'd rather take a half an hour to drink most of my coffee.
EPA can never be used for maintenance, right? So you buy a lawnmower to do the maintenance. When you use the allowable usage chart and you match these expenses in the budget to a box on the chart, you want to avoid something that we call around the office verb shopping.
No verb shopping.
You have that expense in the budget, you go looking for the proper box on the chart, you find the box where that expense really fits, but you don't like what it says there. It says no, right? And then the tendency, it's human nature, is to go looking for a verb that does say yes. And that's verb shopping. And that's not the way you use the CPA allowable usage chart. You find the best verb that describes that expense, and you live with what it says in that box. And that's the way you use the CPA allowable usage chart. So, let's give you a couple of examples here. Let's step through some projects.
I rebuilt my super fast.
We'll have a project where the select board for a town-owned historic building.
It's fast,
or the
but it doesn't handle as good as the GT. It's faster than the GT.
City-owned historic building.
But it lacks on
They're
handling.
applying for funds to fix up the exterior.
So I don't know. I might have to
and replace
do a little toying with that.
So.
I did get it set up so it actually does handle pretty good. It's not quite good enough
to figure out whether the project is legal, right? Is that asset eligible for CPA funding? In the historic category,
I might
that's the
continue
most complicated category, which is why I use it as an example.
I'm sure you'll straighten the
There's
pitch out.
Of what is historic. You can't just say, oh yeah, it's historic, it's old. No, there's a definition in Section 2 of CPA. And a historic resource
I've
has
been
to be
making some pretty good
building,
strides
structure,
in
vessel, real property, document, or artifact.
handling.
It has to be one of those 6 things that you're spending money on. If it's not one of those 6 things, it is not eligible.
Of course, it's been toying with
So in
spring.
this case, it's a building, so that's good so far. It's not just good enough to be one of those 6 things, however. It has to be one of those 6 things that's on the State Register of Historic Places, or the local historic commission has deemed it to be significant.
It really doesn't help
in the
off-road
history,
at all.
archaeology, architecture or culture of your particular city.
So I'll have to toy with that another day.
Both those things have happened.
Right
in
now,
this
I've just
case.
been focusing on
The project would be eligible for funding and it
road,
can move forward to your
road and street
phase. If it's not one of those 6 things, or it's not on the state register, or the Historic Commission is not taking that vote, it wouldn't be eligible until one of those things happens. So now back to the chart for step 2. You've got to find the box, right? What verb fits that work? So in this case, in the historic category, you have 3 yeses. You can acquire a building structure.
Celtics took the lead back on championships.
That doesn't apply here because you already own it. It's already owned a
18.
building.
Yeah, I don't follow basketball, but I guess
destruction.
the Lakers won in 2020 tied them with us.
System would be an example of that.
Now we are on top of the food chain, baby.
Large, the vast majority of historic projects
where
are
we
in
belong.
the bottom box. Rehabilitation. And when you're fixing up the facade of the building and replacing the boiler, you are rehabilitating that historic structure. So that's the box this project would fall into. Rehabilitation of the historic resource.
5 more minutes and I go.
The last consideration is if you should fund the project.
So bad.
The Community Preservation Committee is not required to advance every legal project to the legislative body for a vote. Far from it. The CPC is designed to really dig into that application.
Tomorrow's supposed to be even hotter. Well, originally
really
a couple of days ago they said that tomorrow was going to be better. Tomorrow and Thursday are going to be the hottest day.
The litmus test was just, is the project legal and it goes to town meeting or goes to the
today is
you wouldn't need a CPC,
Tuesday,
right?
Right?
A municipal
Yeah.
lawyer
Thursday.
could just look at every application, deem them legal, and send them to the council to vote on, or the town meeting to vote on. But the CPC has a much bigger job than that. You want to do some good due diligence.
Get on and build a car
the
after
project to the priorities that you've identified in your CPA
shrink appointment tomorrow.
CPA does require every
I haven't built a car in like
plan to
2 or 3
identify
weeks.
their needs and priorities.
Let's
Does this
see.
project fit that?
Yeah, tomorrow will be Wednesday,
Is
but
this
last
the
day
most
to do all
important
your
historic building in
dailies.
town? Or are there others
No,
that
you can
are-
do. I
that
can
are
do
more
them on
dire
Thursday,
straits
but
that
I'll
get
do
funded
them
first?
tomorrow.
You often will get more applications than you have funded.
Because we do the whole run on Thursday, so that gives you until the following Thursday.
Compare applications against each other.
Because you've done one of the 7. You usually have about 18 hours left, or something weird like
A
that.
lot of times you'll get applications that aren't ready for prime time. They're missing information.
But I think I will do them tomorrow after my point.
There's all sorts of questions.
I think that is the plan, Stan.
And they haven't really worked that through yet. You don't want to get too far ahead of
See how this fan holds up in this ridiculous weather. I don't know, because it's going to be hot, and especially because it's supposed to be getting humid. I don't know if my setup of the fan blowing the heat from inside out the exhaust fans in the window is going to work for this. Might be too humid for it. We'll find out. But whereas this is such a powerful fan, I think it might still work.
As long as it creates enough draft to pull some of the cooler AC
and this one we're do a little physics.
air from the living room through your room, it'll be good.
Yellow star.
Yeah, I wedged a couple of pieces of paper under the door so that, because obviously there's so much suction, believe it or not, it'll slam the door closed if I don't put paper on it, so I'll fold it open. And it's not the one that's in this room, it's the one that's down the little hallway around the corner. That door that goes into the kitchen, it'll actually pull that closed.
And then display that on the local cable access channel.
So it's definitely taken, a good amount of air.
Put it copies in the library.
That's good.
All right, so that's the project.
I mean, there are a couple little gaps because it's a window fan where air can get in, but this fan blows so good that I don't think the air is actually getting in. I think that the pressure of the air blowing it out is actually stopping it from coming in.
Oral history project to World War II veterans, is it eligible for CPA funding?
You know how a lot of people, when they have like air conditioner window fans, they make sure there's a tight seal around it so no air gets in.
You display the results.
Yeah.
Let's see how.
Whereas I have a powerful fan actually blowing the air right towards and out that. I don't think the little gaps that are on the left and the right are actually letting in a lot of hot air.
So let's figure out
let's just
why
wrap right around
it's
the
not
fan and go out.
right?
Makes the fan a little less effective, but
that are the biggest problem here.
Marginal.
In doing this oral history project, are you buying a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact? Are you buying one of those things? Is the town or city buying one of those things? They are not. Are you preserving one of those 6 things? And that means protecting the asset from injury, harm, or destruction. Are you doing preservation work on a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact?
What the fuck is Beverly Hills Cops Axel F? I know Axel F stands for Axel Foley,
I
but
guess you could have an antique vase. That would be an artifact.
is there a movie, Beverly Hills Cop movie I didn't know
This oral
about?
history project is not preserving.
Follow up with it. Yeah, I guess they did.
Yeah, Beverly Hills Cop. I don't even think it's out yet. I don't think it's happened.
So it is not eligible for funding. There is no verb on this allowable use chart that will fund an oral history video production where the expenses are going toward hiring.
I saw a couple.
In fact, the 2 verbs I think that best describe this project are create. You're creating.
One of the actresses that plays with them.
And that video production certainly,
I guess, made it a mission to
but as we said
to make
before,
him
CPA funding
laugh and screw up
pay for everything
while
in
filming.
these 4 categories. It is a restricted fund to certain types of projects in those 4 categories.
What,
All right, so
wow,
let's
I'm
move
getting
on.
that from the headline on. After immediately out of
And Chase, once again, I'm having trouble here. Switching slides sometimes, and I apologize for that, folks. I don't know why that is. All right, so what we've done for the last half of the last piece of the presentation.
I love the first one. The first one was
curated
fucking so good.
Best practices.
Very
Probably
nice.
The most common questions we get, the most common
You watched it in
things we see
reverse.
folks confused about. We're going to step through each one of those now as the last part of our presentation today. So this will really help
Does
you
it say
get
when the new
successful in your CPA program
movie's coming?
and learn some good best
Oh,
practices.
wow. It's going to be on Netflix.
So, the first
Beverly
best
Hills Cop
practices
Axel
we'll
F
talk about
premieres
is application.
July 3rd on Netflix.
You know, communities that have had CPA for 20 years might have never updated their application.
There's more and more movies that are going straight to Netflix.
And what makes a good
I
application
like that.
from one that's
I think
not
movie
complete.
theaters
So,
are
if you
gonna be
haven't
going
looked
away
at your
soon.
application in
Oh yeah, just like
the perfect time to do
the
this,
videos
right?
to us.
You've made all your project recommendations in the spring. That's most folks do that.
Video
it's a great
killed
time over
the
the next 3
radio.
months.
I think
really
some of them, like the better IMAXs, will stay.
Make sure you are getting the right information, and you might want to consider a 2-step application process. This is sort of a modern.
They normally only have like one movie playing at a time. You know what I mean?
7, 8, 9 years.
Like the best
have,
ones, at least the one in Burlington does.
Lux was the first one to do this many years ago.
Which is, I guess, rated as like one of the top 3 theaters in the
Step
country.
1 is just a quick, easy one-page form.
For picture, sound, everything. Yeah, it's rated as like one of the best. That's one that me and Jake always went to.
CPC is looking at on that step 1 application is the project legal? Does it go through that process and come up with yes that we just went through? And if it is legal,
Oh no, but Shaquille O'Neal.
invite
Yeah, I think
the
that guy.
applicant to submit a full CPA application.
Shaquille O'Neal did an audition tape for Beverly Hills Cop 4 involving a banana and a hilarious dig at Kazan.
And the full application
Now I need this.
on October 15th. The benefit of this is you don't want to have someone spend a ton of time on a full application.
Alright, I gotta shut my computer off or I'm never gonna make my appointment. You, sir, have a wonderful, wonderful
They might get budgets,
time.
they might
Keep it
get
cool.
letters of support
You
from
too,
the
sir.
community. and
I
they get a
will.
long time and they submit it with
Goodbye,
pictures and charts and
sir.
graphs,
Good day,
and then
sir.
you look at them and say, we can't find
I
it,
said
right?
good day,
And that's
sir.
where trouble starts, right? They call
was
their
the fucking-
favorite selectman and complain about the CPC, or they call their city councilor, and the pressure's put on because they've invested a lot in this, and it's hard to accept that it's not even eligible, won't even get a hearing. So this allows you to really filter out those projects, and it also allows you to, when you're getting back to the applicant and saying your project is legal, now you can apply for funding, it gives you an opportunity to tell them exactly what you want to see in that application. You know, make sure to include the deed to the property that you want to fix up, because we want to make sure it's properly owned by the town. We were going to build affordable housing in my town on a piece of land, and we couldn't find the deed. It wasn't ours. actually, and we had to take it by eminent domain and pay the heirs for something that we thought we owned. So you never know. So in this application, if you're going to review your application and change your procedures, and it's really a good idea to do this every few years, the first thing you want to talk about is your application deadline. The biggest mistake we see in CPA communities is setting the application deadline too late. Most communities do one time a year, one cycle a year, one grant funding round a year. Some do two. If you're doing one, you really want to set your application deadline in early fall. I see communities set it in January 15th, and then they don't have any time to do the proper due diligence. And they open the application for the first time on January 15th, and it's missing a budget, and it's incomplete, and you have a lot of questions, and you don't understand it. And you just don't have time to go back and forth and really do proper due diligence, and you end up rushing, and that's where mistakes are made and bad projects happen. So the earlier the deadline, the more success you're going to have, based on the 23 years of experience we've seen with CPA. One neat little trick is to put a little emphasis on the applicant to figure out what verb on that chart describes their project. Make them really think about what they're doing and whether it's eligible for CPA funding. Some communities put the chart right in their application and tell them to circle the box that applies. And you only want them to circle one verb on that chart. If you don't specify that, folks circle willy-nilly because they think the more verbs they circle, the better chance their project has of passing. But there are very few projects that span two categories. It's actually much more rare than you'd think. There are a couple of examples, but it's much easier and much cleaner to just tell folks, show us the one verb that best describes this project. Of course, we talked about making sure that your application has a request for a budget, and we would suggest not even accepting the application if it doesn't have a budget. But if you required one, push it back across the desk and say, hey, we can't accept this yet without a budget. And the last thing is, if you're doing some physical work on a piece of municipal land or a private organization, you want to really be clear that whoever controls that land has signed off on this idea. And we've seen time and time again, folks come to the CPC with a great idea, and then you ask them, well, you talk to the Parks Department about this? Because they actually control that land, and they might want to do this project. So the Parks Department in that project, really should be the co-applicant, or at least submit a letter saying, we discussed this project, and we will absolutely implement it. We love it. And we love the help people are giving us in getting it done. So you definitely want to ask folks to make sure that they've talked to the municipal agencies. The other thing with applications that we see is late applications, right? And you want to be very firm that you have a deadline, because if you're not, you will get applications right before town meeting or the city council, and will be rushed, and you won't have time to do any due diligence. But there are a few examples of true emergencies or true applications that couldn't have possibly been foreseen. Land purchases are the biggest example. You really can't control when a piece of land will come on the market that you might want to buy. So it's good to establish a process by which the CPC will accept out of cycle applications. Maybe it's, and it should be a high bar, right? You don't want people just willy-nilly ignoring your deadline because they know they can submit it late. So maybe it requires a unanimous vote of the CPC to accept an out-of-cycle application. We have some examples on our website in the project application. You also want to make sure that your application reflects the priorities you come up on your CPA plan. So you might want to tell people, we're encouraging folks who are building more family housing as opposed to senior housing. That's what we've uncovered as a need. So your plan is your guide to your project selection. And the last best practice here on applications is we find communities that actually then write down exactly what they've recommended. After the CPC votes, it's a formal written recommendation that's created with all the conditions and all the details on the project. New Bedford does this really well. Newton does this really well. A bunch of other communities do great formal written recommendations, and they really go a long way toward avoiding problems and confusions later on. So that's something we highly recommend. All right, second best practice here, grant agreements. So typically, these are used for projects on privately owned property. So we talked about the anti-aid amendment before and the importance of figuring out a way to protect the public's investment in privately owned organizations. And when you're giving a CPA grant of public money to a private organization, there should be a contract between. Those are two separate entities. And you can't advance them the money ahead of time and just pray that they use it properly. That's not allowed. So a grant agreement is a legal contract, basically. That's what we call them in CPA, but they are contracts. And the contracts, can be pretty extensive. We have great samples on our website. Most communities use this, but not all. It really is a best practice. The grant agreement would talk about, describe the project, any conditions that are placed on the project. It would have a nice timetable for completion. Any requirements you put in there on reporting. Do you want reports quarterly as the project progresses, or just one report at the end? And some communities also put what's called a clawback provision in their grant agreement, which explains what happens if the grant agreement conditions are not met. The money has to be repaid, for example. And we have some examples on our website of clawback grant agreements. So, time for another poll here. We know this is a great best practice, but we really don't know exactly how many organizations and how widespread grant agreements are. So 2 questions here. Does your community use grant agreements? We'd like to know. And if you do use grant agreements, who signs those grant agreements? We constantly hear some friction sometimes. Some municipalities let the CPC create the grant agreement and sign or co-sign it. In other cases, municipalities, once the CPC makes their written recommendation, they never see the grant agreement and can't prove it and make corrections. So we'd like to know whether your CPC gets to review that grant agreement, make any changes, and is a party to signing that grant agreement. So I think we've allowed enough time here. Chase, why don't we display the results of this survey? I hope to be helpful to folks. So about half of our communities use grant agreements, which is great. And half the people from communities on this webinar anyways. And most of them, the CPC gets to really work on that grant agreement or impact that grant agreement, which is great. It's not something really a CPC can control, unfortunately. Municipalities usually have the final say on those sort of things. So it's good to have a good relationship with the powers that be and make sure that these grant agreements, you're working alongside them if you can. All right, the third best practice we're going to talk about, buying land and buildings with CPA funding. This is the core of CPA, which is actually why CPA was created, to buy land when back in the 1990s, Massachusetts was really having a lot of land and a lot of development, and historic buildings were being torn down and farms were being built on. And it was a time when a lot of communities experienced rapid growth. And so this was a kind of a smart growth tool. That's how CPA started out. And when you acquire land or buildings with CPA funds, it's critically important that the city council order or the warrant article specify the purpose for which that acquisition is happening. Are you buying that piece of land to be used as conservation land? Are you buying it to be used as recreation land? Are you buying a historic resource? Not very common, but it does happen. Buying a historic building or an artifact. Are you buying land to build affordable housing or a building that you're going to convert to affordable housing? Very important that the purpose is specified because that locks in that purpose for later. And a lot of times, 20 years later, you never know what's going to happen with a piece of land. When you're buying conservation or recreation land, you want to avoid using the term open space. In CPA, in the definition section of CPA, open space means conservation land or active recreation. So if you intended it to be for conservation purposes, but your warrant article or city council order said open space, someone later on can come and build soccer fields on there if the town or city permits them.
Gonna have to get some water.
So you don't want to use the term open space. Use the two categories of open space: conservation land and recreation, active recreation. This actually was a big issue in Sturbridge and led to a revocation vote, actually, when there was some confusion over why a piece of land was purchased. So very important to specify that purchase. When you're buying land with CPA funds, there is a part of CPA that is critical that you comply with, and that's Section 12A. And it says that anytime you buy something with CPA funds, you have to have a permanent restriction placed on that land, limiting the use of that land in the future for the purpose for which you acquired it. So that's why it's very important to say the purpose in the warrant article, because then everyone knows that that will be used for conservation in the future, and it'll have a conservation restriction on it. The same organization cannot own the parcel and the restriction. Those are two separate things. So if the city or town is buying a piece of conservation land, the restriction on that land has to be owned by a third party. The state can own the restriction, a local land trust, a regional land trust like Mass Audubon, but the town cannot own the restriction on its own property, because sometimes you have to enforce the terms of that restriction. The town's not going to sue itself. So it has to be two separate parties that own the fee ownership of the property and the restriction. It can happen either way. You know, we have examples of where a land trust owns a piece of conservation land, and CPA funds were used to help buy it, and now the town owns the restriction on the land trust. And this applies in all categories. In housing, it's not usually a problem. City or town doesn't usually own the housing unit. Usually it's a developer or an individual who owns their home ownership, or a housing authority. So usually it's not a problem. In most cases, the city or town owns the restriction. All right, in the home stretch here, two more best practices. We'll move to recreation land. So it's very popular. We made some changes to CPA at the legislature in 2012 to make it a lot easier for folks to rehabilitate parks, playgrounds, and athletic fields. It's become a big part of CPA, but we're seeing some issues with that. And the issues are that CPA parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, community gardens, trails are designed to be built on land that is permanently dedicated to recreation use. If you want to use CPA funds, but the land is not permanently dedicated, you need to dedicate it first. So if that land was required for unrestricted purposes by the municipality, or was required for another purpose, that's general municipal. And you either use general municipal funds or you first dedicate it to recreation. But CPA should be spending money on land that is permanently protected for recreation purposes. So, how do you tell? It's not that easy, believe it or not. You need to do some due diligence. This is one of those due diligence things that a CPC has to dig into when you are spending money on rec projects. One way is if it has a conservation restriction on it, then it's pretty obvious. Most land that is under control of the Parks Department, or whatever you call the Parks Department in your community, that is protected land. That is under the Parks Department. That is parkland. You want to go back and pull the original deed and the original town meeting or city council vote to acquire that land. Sometimes you're going back 150 years, pulling a handwritten deed, but you want to see what it says. Why did the town acquire this land? If it says recreational use or parkland, you know you're okay. And then I also want to explore at some point, maybe there was a change of use vote at the legislative body that dedicated that land to recreation or transferred it to control of the Parks Department. So another quick poll here, our last one of the day, before we move into the Q&A about this topic. We have 4 different pieces of land on the screen now, and we want to know which ones you think would be okay to spend CPA money on. And check as many as you think are okay. So is the front lawn of the town library okay to build land, to build CPA assets on? Let's say you want to put benches there. Is land acquired by municipality and specified park purposes way back in 1910, is that okay? Is spending money on a Little League baseball field okay? And unused municipal land. So those are 4 types of land that we want to examine here. So check whichever ones you think are appropriate for CPA recreational land. And Chase, why don't you display the results? So the 2 that have the most votes are absolutely correct. Land that was acquired for park purposes, or has an existing Little League baseball field under control of the Parks Department or whatever group that is that controls fields in town, those are definitely eligible for CPA funds. If you have the front lawn of the town library, that is not recreational land. That is dedicated to library purposes. And both the building and the land are under control of the Board of Library Trustees. And you put CPA money on that front lawn, somewhere down the line, if the library wants to expand or build a new parking lot, bye-bye benches. And there's nothing you can do about that because the land is not truly recreational land. So most town buildings are dedicated to another purpose. And it's very difficult to use CPA funds without some type of protection on the outside area. And same thing with unused municipal land. It may look like open space. It may look like it's just a field or some woods that the town owns from a long time ago, but it's probably unrestricted land, which means you could build your park there, but then the town could also build a dump there or a new town hall 20 years from now. So you want to make sure that CPA projects have that the restricted money is being spent on restricted land. The state requires this. Anytime the state's signature park grant program gives money, that application says right in it that we're not going to give a municipality money under the park grant program unless that land is permanently protected for recreation. And the reason why it's important is we have another amendment to the state's constitution. We have a lot of amendments to our constitution. The NBA amendment is one we talked about. There's also a critical one, which is much more modern, called Article 97. And what it says this is the entire amendment on the screen, but basically it protects any land that is dedicated to recreation or open space. And there is an extensive and very difficult process that the town or city must go through to change the use of land protected by Article 97. So those examples I gave you of how you can tell whether parkland is protected, that means all those examples give it Article 97 protection. And then you know that your restricted money is being spent on restricted land. You don't want to spend restricted CPA money on unprotected land. And Article 97 protects you in that case, and there's a very, like I said, a very extensive process to go through to do that. And then the last thing we have for you today is about housing. Undoubtedly, you've all heard housing is the biggest problem in the Commonwealth right now. It's really choking our ability to grow as a Commonwealth. And CPA, of course, is also a housing program in addition to the other 3 areas. The difficulty with housing is it's complicated, and it's expensive, and it's fraught with political peril. And it takes some local commitment and some real intentional planning to get at this housing issue. And the state is really putting the pressure on now, as they should, because it is our biggest problem. Obviously, we want to maintain local control, and CPA is great because you can decide what type of local housing you want to build with CPA funds. So it has that local control. But we all need to contribute to this problem. I'm afraid that the more CPA funds build up for housing without being spent in some communities you see, the more chance we have of legislation being proposed that does some things to force communities to do things that we don't want to have happen. We want to maintain that local control. So I would urge, all CPCs to really dig into and be very proactive rather than reactive to housing opportunities. And that's the way we'll advance as a state and keep CPA exactly the way we want it to be. So that's our formal presentation today. We invite you to submit questions anytime. We're here for you. I guess we'll probably get a lot of questions in the next few days, so give us a little time to respond to those. But by email or technical assistance, we are always here to help. We love answering questions.
Really bad slowdowns.
and please be in touch if you have anything. We'll end the recording now, and then we will move into our Q&A session.
Recording stopped.
All right, so I'm going to bring in Chase now to describe how we're going to do our Q&A. And for folks that can stick around, terrific. It's great to have you here. And you can ask your questions over the next hour. We'll stay as long as there are questions. And if you have to go, we appreciate your attending very much. And you can check out the recording on the website. So Chase, how are we going to do this?
Yeah, hi folks. So like it says on the screen here, which we'll leave it up for a couple seconds, you'll see a little button on your Zoom menu that says raise hand. I'll be able to see the order that folks come in, and we'll unmute you, and we'll ask that you give everyone your name and which CPA community you're from, and then you can ask your question, and we will answer. And like Stuart mentioned, we're going to try to stick around until about 2 o'clock or until we run out of questions, but we'll see how that goes. And before we jump into the folks that have their hands raised, I see a lot of hands up, which is great. I did get a couple of questions, Stuart, from the chat throughout the presentation that I thought we could tackle right up front here.
Sure.
So this one's, I think I know the answer to this, but someone asked, can a town refuse, I'm assuming they mean their town meeting, but can a town refuse to approve legal applications in 2 categories? They give the example of housing and open space, to spend all of the money on only one other category. The example they give is historic. They acknowledge that there's 10% required, but is that something the town could do, is turn down projects in other categories to just fund historic projects?
Okay, it's a tough question because I'm not exactly sure what the person was asking, but it sounds like this community bundles all their CPA projects into one vote at the legislative body, either the city council or town meeting. And that is a fine way to do it. It's not our favorite way of doing it. We like each CPA project to have a separate vote and a separate article at the legislative body. But, you know, in bigger communities, there might be 20 projects that year, so it's tough. So some communities do bundle the projects into one vote. But the CPA guidance from the Department of Revenue says that if you bundle different projects in different categories into one vote at your legislative body, each project is subject to a separate appropriation, meaning anyone can raise their hand and say to the moderator, I want to vote, I want that project pulled out for a separate appropriation. The town or city budget happens the same way. They read all the line items of the budget, police get this much, fire, education, etc. But anyone, those are all separate appropriations. Anyone can stand up and amend one line item or call for a separate vote on that line item. So I think that's what the person was asking. And that's the answer, is you can bundle them, but the moderator should know that every one of those appropriations is a separate vote if someone wants it.
Okay. Lynn Barbie, I'm going to unmute you if you could let us know where you're from and what your question is. You should see a little pop-up that allows you to turn your mic on. There we go.
Yeah, so I'm from Mashpee, and on the chart, my question on the chart is the rehabilitate and or restore housing. If it's public housing, does that mean that the CPC money can be used for that or not? I mean, we've had these questions before.
Yes, so this is a very complicated and evolving area of CPA.
Okay.
So when the legislature created CPA back in 2000, they clearly wanted CPA to be used for housing production, new housing opportunities, not taking care of things you already have. In fact, all 4 categories, if you look at that rehabilitate box, Lynn, down the bottom, in the beginning of CPA, all 4 categories said you cannot rehabilitate anything unless you acquired or created a CPA. It said that in the historic category and the recreation category, as well as the 2 where it still says that, housing and open space. So that made no sense, frankly. I'm not quite sure how that got through the legislature. Because the one category where it doesn't work is historic, right? In Bedford, one of the first CPA community in the state went to rehab their old town hall right away, and their town council said, I'm sorry, I can't let you do that project because you didn't create or buy town hall or build town hall with CPA funds in 1853. So Bedford said, well, that doesn't make any sense. So they appealed to the legislature, and the legislature said, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. So that was the first box to get fixed. And basically they replaced in the historic category the rehabilitate box. They replaced what it said before, which was no unless required or created with CPA funds. They replaced that with a yes. Fast forward to 2007, the city of Newton proposes a project to rehabilitate Stearns and Pellegrini Park, but the city or town already owned that park and it wasn't built with CPA funds. And so citizens sued them, and the citizens won because CPA didn't allow that. But then there was a big hue and cry among all the other CPA communities. Well, this is kind of what we want to do with recreation. Why do we want to be buying new recreation land for soccer fields when we have 15 soccer fields that are dilapidated and we can't fix them up? So the legislature agreed to change the recreation rehabilitation box in 2012. It took 5 years to convince them to do that. But they specifically said, look, we're changing it in recreation. Historic has already changed. We are not going to change that in open space and housing. Open space, that's conservation land. We really don't want to open up that category. Conservation land is mostly designed to sit there and be available for passive recreation or wildlife. You don't want to be doing a lot of things construction-wise, conservation. And housing, the legislature was really clear by prohibiting that in the beginning. They wanted to focus on new housing production. So most projects at your housing authority, that is existing affordable housing. It wasn't created or built with CPA funds. So most projects there are not eligible for funding. There are a few projects that might be eligible under the preserve box. Let's say a new roof might be eligible. There is some guidance from the Department of Housing and Community Development on that. There is some controversy on that guidance because DOR doesn't agree with it. So you have two state agencies that don't agree. And we're looking to possibly do some clarification with the legislature on that to get those two state agencies on the same page. But in general, no, you cannot rehabilitate existing affordable housing except in very limited circumstances under the preserve.
So possibly you can put CPC money can be used to put a new roof on public affordable housing. That's preserving, putting new windows in, all outside envelope things.
Right.
Is that more, is that allowed as long as you're not like, remodeling the interior?
Yeah, we'd be doing a disservice, Lynn, if we tried to dig into all the fine possible things here in the short amount of time we have.
Okay.
But there are some things that are possible. It depends upon which state agency you want to follow. If you ask DOR, they're going to say no to everything. If you ask DHCD, they'll say yes to some limited things. So we can help you navigate that, Lynn.
All right.
In the future. So
thank you.
All right, no problem. By the way, I should mention, as Chase is calling the next person, there's no accident that our presentation has a green background here, and you can see behind me I'm wearing a green shirt, and we have a green background here. Chase dared me to wear my Celtics hat for all the question and answer here, which I would, except I look pretty silly there. But I'm a huge Celtics fan, and so hopefully folks are not too tired this morning if they stayed up to watch the game. But our green theme continues here, and green is CPA, right? Open space, conservation land. All right, who do you have next, Chase?
Well, before we get to that, I've got a lot of folks asking the same question, so I'll answer it now. Yes, the recording for the presentation will be up on the Coalition website in the coming days. We will send out a newsletter to folks when it's available so that everybody knows if they want to go check out the presentation, it'll be there. And everyone who registered for this training will receive a copy of the PowerPoint slides, PDF. We would just ask folks, those are for your learning purposes. This is a coalition presentation, so we'd ask you not to post those slides up on your local CPC page or anywhere on your municipality page, since this is a coalition presentation, but we will get those slides out to you folks. So next up we have Robert Mahawald. Hope I said that close to correct, but you should be able to unmute Robert and ask your question and let us know where you're from.
Great. Thank you. Robert Mahol. I'm from Dartmouth, and I want to thank Stuart and Chase and everybody else who worked on this presentation. It was very useful to me. I'm a total newbie, so my question is very general and simple. I don't understand the verb support and how that's differentiated from the other verbs there on the use chart.
Join the club. There was actually no definition of support in the CPA legislation when it was first passed. Most state laws have a definition section. It's section 2 in CPA, and it's the best section of any state law. So I'd love for you all to read the full state law of 17 pages. Don't do it late at night, fall asleep. But if you're going to only read one thing, read the definition section. It's really good. It really is where the rubber meets the road. And there was no definition, Robert, of support. So a lot of folks were scratching their head. In the housing category, which is the only one that support is available in, most towns felt that support would be extended to allow rental assistance, for example. But then a couple of town councils disagreed, and they said they didn't read it that way. So we worked with the legislature. There was big change in 2012 where we made about 17 different improvements to CPA, and one of them was to add a definition for the word support. So support means anything pretty much that helps you build more affordable housing or creates new affordable housing opportunities. So some typical things in support: paying for a housing production plan for the town so they can figure out which areas of town are appropriate for housing. Hiring a housing coordinator to work on new production. Doing a perk test on a piece of town-owned land to determine whether you can put a septic system in there and build affordable housing in your town. So it's really a catch-all for things that help you create new housing opportunities. The follow-up question, Robert, you may have, which a lot of people ask, is why is it only available in the housing category? And I don't know for sure. I started with Coalition in 2006, and I started as chair of my committee in 2001. So the only part of CPI I missed was the one where they developed the legislation at the state level. But I've been told that the reason why support was included in the housing category is that the legislature knew that was going to be the hardest category, and they wanted to give as many tools in the toolbox. If you look at the allowable usage chart, the housing category has the most number of yeses. I think they felt it was very dangerous to open up support in the other three categories. You know, the support of recreation could be anything, and you'd see an entire Parks and Rec budget being moved over to CPA, and that would be what we call supplanter. So I think that's the reason why you see support only in the housing category. The legislature is very afraid of communities moving over a lot of the municipal expenses onto support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Here. And next up, we have Cheryl Doyle. Cheryl, if you want to unmute and let us know where you're from.
Hi, my name's Cheryl Doyle, and I'm from Norwood. My question comes under your, let me bring it up. The one slide, it said spending funds on recreational land.
Yes.
So if a town has airport land and it's owned by the airport, can you build a playground on it? By the rec department?
No.
No.
That's airport land. As soon as the FAA says they have to widen their runway for safety, and that, you know, goes into the playground, they're going to remove that playground. So that land is restricted to airport uses. And CPA land should be restricted to recreational uses. Now, it is possible, Cheryl, that your legislative body, it's a municipally owned airport?
Yes.
Yeah. it's possible that your legislative body, your town meeting, could take a vote to carve out the piece of land where you want to build the playground and dedicate that to recreation and put it under control of the Parks Department or the DPW or whatever department or board manages the parks in town. And then you would be having, it's called a change of use vote. There'd be a vote at a town meeting to change the use of this piece of land identified on a map and on file with the town clerk from airport purposes to recreational purposes. And then that land would be protected by Article 97. It would be restricted to recreation. And that it would be very difficult for the city or town to do that. I'm not so sure airport authorities can give up a piece of their land for recreation. I don't even know if they can. They're fairly regulated, and that might not be possible for an airport. But that is not recreational land. That's airport property. So really the airport budget should build that park, not CPA.
Can I do a follow-up?
Sure.
What happens if it went to town meeting and it got voted on to build it?
You are opening yourself up to a 10 taxpayer lawsuit. And it's the same, penalty for any project that is passed by town meeting. Any appropriation, 10 taxpayers can get together, and if they feel the appropriation was inappropriate, they can sue the town. It's not all that common. If mistakes are made, right, Cheryl? We're all human, right? And sometimes folks don't understand, and mistakes are made. And that happens. But that is the citizens are the control mechanism on any municipal spending with this 10 taxpayer lawsuit.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Cheryl. So we actually have another question along those lines that I think is pertinent here. Similar vein, and this is a question I know we get a lot, Stuart, is what if the land is owned by the school department? Can you build recreation park, something like that on school?
Right. So this is another evolving area that needs some clarification in CPA. And remember I said in 2012 the legislation was changed. Before 2012 you couldn't rehabilitate existing, parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, and that sort of thing. So it wasn't a problem. But we kind of created the problem in 2012 because that legislation that opened up CPA to be used for rehabilitation activities didn't really anticipate all the possible ways communities would do that. And one of the issues that came up was school properties, because school properties are dedicated to educational purposes. So that is the one potential area of CPA where we see funding being spent, which clearly I think the legislature would have said okay to, because you don't see school property in most cases used for anything else. Even the cases of where you'll see a new school being built on the field, and then they replace the field where the old school was. Most schools, don't get rid of their parks, playgrounds, athletic fields on their property. So it's not a huge exposure to do that. It is something that I think probably needs to be cleaned up in the legislation. But I'm sure the legislature is on board when they opened it up to rehabilitation. They clearly intended any recreational activity in town on dedicated land, like an athletic field at a school, would be okay. Some communities don't want to spend that. Schools do occupy anywhere from 60 to 70% of most municipal budgets, and CPA certainly was not a school budget program. It was not designed to supplement the school budget. So we do have some communities that are not willing, they want projects that are open more to the community. The one thing I will say on this topic is, if you do a school project, make sure that you have a memorandum of understanding with the school that the community is going to be able to access them. It's really not appropriate to use community preservation funds, which are designed for the community, and then have the school put a padlock on that at 3 o'clock when the high school lacrosse team stops practicing and no one else can get on that team. So you really want to make sure, if you are doing a school project and you're spending CPA money on the school fields or recreational assets, you want to make sure there's community availability for that after school, weekend, and all summer. So that's an important part of doing school projects.
Great. Okay, Linda Wingevin, I'm going to unmute you if you could let us know where you're from and what your question is.
I'm Linda Michigan from Phillipston. I'm a CPC member, and I just wanted you to expand a little bit when you discussed the administrative account. You said 2 newspaper ads are required per year. Would you just clarify what those ads would be for?
Yep. So have you ever seen municipalities have required advertising for a lot of different things? If the conscom or planning board is having a hearing, they usually have to advertise it in the newspaper. They're called legal ads. Have you ever seen
Yes.
those newspapers, Linda?
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. So that legislation, the CPA legislation has that requirement when you have your annual public hearing, which is required by CPA to get input from the public on your CPA priorities. That is required to be advertised in a local newspaper each of 2 weeks prior to the public hearing. And it looks just like a little legal notice that your conscom. And so your town knows how to do those type of ads, Linda, because they put them all the time for the conscom and the planning board and the ZBA, et cetera. The problem we're having is there aren't many newspapers left.
Yes.
And that's a big problem. And the legislature knows it because they have the same problem for their newspaper ads that are required for the ZBA or the planning board. So there is actually legislation pending. I really hope it passes that says there will be other ways that you could advertise legal notices without using a newspaper. The town website, posting it at town hall, that sort of thing. Mostly it'll probably be an electronic version that can be done. I hope that legislation passes because that'll make it a lot easier to advertise.
Thank you.
Okay, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. So I'm going to jump to one of the questions we received in the chat, Stuart, which is, again, one of these questions we get a lot from folks, which is, see if I can find it, but it's effectively, here we go. Would digitization of a community's historic/vital records qualify for CPA funding for historic preservation?
All right, great question. We seem to be maxing out our storage space in municipal town halls across the state. And a lot of folks, as time goes on, there's municipal requirements to keep a lot of data. Other data is not required to be kept by a municipality, but it's not important. So we're seeing a lot of folks wanting to digitize things and then throw out the original documents. And that is not what CPA is for. Digitization does nothing to preserve the actual document. You're just taking a picture of the document. So it's important for municipality. It does tremendous things to give access to those documents on the internet, which is great. But like I said, CPA can't pay for everything in the historic category. And digitization is not allowed with CPA funds because you're doing nothing to acquire, preserve, or rehabilitate that document. You're just taking a picture of it. CPA for documents is really about restoring the document, deacidifying the paper, fixing the tears, taking the stains that are ruining the document, encasing it in protective mylar. That's what CPA funds is for on documents, not digital.
All right, next up we have Richard Hewitt. Richard, you should be able to unmute, let us know where you're from and what your question is. Give me a second here.
Richard, I know you've been saving this question out there in Groton since the beginning of my presentation when your hand went up, so hopefully you can unmute and you can hear your question.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Good,
job,
sorry. Okay, thanks for taking my question. Yeah, I actually have a question about invasives, but before I do that, I just wanted clarification on a couple of points on the spending chart, or at least best practices. As far as funds for administrative account, at the end of the year, if there are funds left over, what is considered the best practice? To keep that in administrative or to return that to the unallocated reserve?
It's actually not a best practice. It's required. It's in the CPA legislation. So your administrative account is an operating account. It's the only CPA account that's only good for 1 year. And so your town officials should automatically be closing out that account. Any unspent administrative funds should be closed out to your CPA fund balance, your undesignated CPA fund balance.
Right. Okay.
I'm sure that's
And then
happening.
town meeting authorizes a new 5% for that
Right.
next fiscal year. So it's only good for 1 fiscal year.
Okay. The other question along the chart is, clarify recreation. Is that one of the, should that be a bucket for 10% allocation, or is that, so there should be 4 categories then in terms of open space and.
Right. There are 4 categories. But when it comes to the reserve accounts, open space and recreation share a reserve account. So open space will mean conservation. Remember, recreation wasn't a big part of CPA before 2012. And it actually said in the legislation originally you could only use the 10% reserve account for conservation projects. But when we expanded recreation, the legislature also felt it was important to expand that reserve account and allow communities to spend it on conservation or recreation.
Okay, thank you. The question I have has to do with invasive species. We have a situation where a lake was basically taken over by invasives. We did a treatment and cleared it up. However, of course, these things come back. And so this is a big expense. 10 years later, they're looking to get funding for that. I think we probably are not going to do that, but I'm just wondering how invasives should be dealt with, as those things can explode and destroy a piece of property fairly quickly, and it can't be part of a regular maintenance budget. It's too overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. There is a definition of maintenance in CPA. It's the IRS definition of maintenance. It's things that keep an asset in an operating state, and keep it fit to be used for its intended purpose. And that usually means, regular things being done to it. Invasive species, is probably a project you could justify under preserve, protecting the asset from injury, harm, or destruction. But preservation activities are only eligible to the extent that they're not maintenance. So if you're seeing something that needs to be redone, that probably means it's going to need to be redone in the future again, and that would be maintenance. It might not have been obvious to folks 10 years ago. It's not set in stone that you made a mistake, Richard, 10 years ago when you used CPA money on that. It might not have been obvious. Maybe folks really hoped that it was a one-time treatment, or maybe the company that does it said, "Oh, you only have money this once. It's going to be great." But if it's becoming apparent that this is an ongoing expense, that is not something that CPA is going to cover.
It's just awkward because you don't want to put chemical treatment in the lake every year. It's only needed periodically. Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard. So let's do one more here. Karen Margolis, I'm going to unmute you. You're going to let us know where you're from and what the question is. And then we've got a couple administrative questions in the chat, which I think I'll jump to after this one, Stuart.
Hi, Karen Margolis. I'm a CPC member in Framingham. And I have a question that just seems to be an ongoing question for our committee. When we send our recommendations to the City Council in Framingham, we know that they can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on each project. But our question is, can they reduce the budget? Or does that have to be part of the city's ordinance that allows them to reduce? So we're just not clear if, just in general, is that one of their options, or does it has to be specifically called out in our CPC ordinance?
Great question. So according to the Department of Revenue, the City Council can reduce a CPC recommendation. The tricky part becomes if they want to reduce it and change the project dramatically, right? So if you recommend $500,000 to build a new playground, and the City Council says, you know what, I move to reduce that appropriation to $400,000. That is just, too much to spend on a playground. And so you'll have to figure out what you can do for $400,000. That would be fine. But if they're also going to change the project recommendation on what's going to happen there, let's say the project is a playground for younger kids, and the city council says, no, we want to reduce the appropriation and just make it much more simple and just have it for older kids, a few older play structures. Well, that's not really the CPC's recommendation anymore. And we all know that a legislative body can't vote on something unless it's first recommended by the CPC. So these things that Chase put up on the screen here are usually the actions that, the limited actions that a town meeting or a city council can make when an appropriation is in front of them. And you can see the third one is reduce the amount, but they can't massively change or substantively change the project, because then it's not the one recommended by the CPC anymore. And I would ignore that last one. I've never seen it used. I think I know why DOR put that in there, but it's not practical and it's complicated. So I would just ignore that one because it's not used. But usually the three are approve, reject, or reduce.
Okay, that's great. Can I ask one quick follow-up question to an earlier question that came up?
Sure.
Okay, so there was talk about how the land has to be dedicated to recreation or conservation use if you're doing recreation. So what about in the case of a rail trail where the entity, the city entity that has the care and control is DPW, because there's sewers underneath the actual rail trail, and the rail trail is, listed by the state as a rail trail and is funded by the state as a rail trail?
So is it protected in any way? Could the rail trail be eliminated?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to dig into the legal paperwork of that one, right?
Rail trails there to stay.
Like I said, when I put up that slide of how can you tell if something is recreation land, occasionally there are, sticky wickets, and this is definitely one of those. One thing that you could do is if it's not properly protected, you could work with the DPW to come up with a restriction for that rail trail that still gives them the right to do what they need to do, but ensures that the rail trail won't be removed. That would give it a protected status, but you really have to get into the legality of that. It's a tough one for me to answer without seeing what the legal structure is in charge of that project.
Right. So even if there's significant state funding for the rail trail itself, including bridges over highways and so forth.
The state, we know that the state park grant program won't give funding unless they feel it's permanently protected. So usually, there was state grants applied to it.
Yeah.
You might want to dig into that. Obviously, they did that digging that I just talked about into the legality. It sounds like they determined it was protected to some. So you might, if the CPC wants to consider matching funds there, you might want to just ask the state park program, what protections did you feel that were in place that would justify it?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. So I'm going to jump to the questions we got. So, got a couple questions about the administrative support. First would be, what are the mechanics for using administrative funds to expand a town employee's role? And can they be used to hire a consultant to update the CPA plan?
Yeah, the second one is definitely yes. I mean, that's actually some communities do that with their administrative funds. Hiring a consultant to do your plan is absolutely fine. Small communities probably not necessary, but a lot of the larger communities do hire an outside consultant to write their CPA plan. There's not a tremendous choice of consultants out there. There's only one or two that do this type of work, so it can be tough to get competitive bids. The first question, remind me, Chase, because I answered the second one.
What are the mechanics for using to expand a town employee?
Right. So if that town employee is part-time, absolutely. And that's what we did with my CPC. We had a 32-hour-a-week conservation agent. He really wanted to work full-time, and we really needed some help with the CPC. So we added 8 hours onto his weekly schedule and paid those with PTA funds. So if the person is part-time, absolutely. The issue is if they're already full-time, if you carve out some of the money that's in the budget that pays them and move that over to CPA, that's supplanting. That's follow line 6 in the CPA legislation that says you can't supplant what is already in the municipal budget and is typically paid either by a municipality out of the municipal budget. So if they're part-time, yes. If they're full-time,
Great. All right, we're going to jump back to the live question. Chelsea Westgate, I'm going to unmute you. You can let us know which community you're from and what your question is.
Hello, I'm Chelsea Westgate. I'm the CPC coordinator for Plymouth. I received an application recently for an open space acquisition on a parcel of land that abuts oceanfront property. The intent for the property is to demolish a small commercial building that's on there and expand parking that currently exists. They want to keep the land open to the public, but the parking lot would have the restriction that you would require a beach sticker to use that parking lot, and I'm wondering if that's still allowable with that restriction.
yeah, that's a tricky one, Chelsea. The beach sticker is not an issue. There are definitely provisions that you can charge folks to use recreational properties, right? A lot of communities do that, particularly beaches, but other assets too. So that's not an issue. The issue is acquiring a piece of land for parking. And that's a tough one. I don't think there's a clear answer to that. One of the things that would point toward no to that is anytime you acquire a piece of land with CPA, you have to put a restriction on it. The state will not approve a restriction on a parking lot. That's not conservation land or
Very confused by my
recreation
live that I'm
land.
looking at. I see
and no land trust, or recreation group is going to hold a restriction on a parking
completely
lot.
different going on over there.
I might have misspoken a little bit. If I can expand on that, the only intent is, intent isn't only for a parking lot. That's really the part that I'm caught up on. There's other aspects of this that will jive with the conservation restriction that they'll be seeking for part of this parcel, for the parcel in general. It was just the beach sticker actually that had me caught up.
Oh yeah. I don't think, the beach sticker is not an issue. There's nothing in CPA that says communities can't, municipalities don't have the right to charge for access to recreation. I mean, the state charges for access to state parks in a lot of cases, right? Or federal does to federal parks. So that's not an issue. How big is the parcel?
So confused.
I just received this application 2 days ago, so you're gonna have to forgive me for not.
Right. So if the parcel, there's nothing wrong with using a small percentage of a recreation or conservation parcel for parking. Every recreation or conservation area should have easy access. But if it's 2 acres and they're going to cover 1.5 acres with parking and the other 1/2 acre is going to be beach, that's tricky. If parking is only an incidental use on the piece they're acquiring and there are going to be other recreational uses, that would be fine.
Okay, I think that answers my question.
Great.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thanks, Chelsea. Next, we have Susan Cohen. Susan, I'm going to unmute you if you want to tell us where you're from and what your question is.
Hi, my name is Susan Cohen, and I'm from Brookline and a brand new CPC member representing the Housing Authority. My question is that you've discussed the need for a permanent deed restriction or other type of restriction where land is being acquired. But what if you're giving the money for preservation purposes? And so there's extensive work to be done on the building, but there's no actual acquisition involved. Would it be appropriate to require there to be some kind of a restriction placed on the property itself?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell me, Gene, are we talking about a private property or a municipal property?
The specific examples that have come up have been privately owned nonprofit housing.
So privately owned nonprofit housing?
Yeah, but also housing authority property. there's been two different preservation awards made.
Okay, I'm not so sure I'm following that.
So the preservation being the kind of work that you described earlier that has been okayed by EOHLC. So for instance, a roof, I'll just say a roof.
Right. So housing authority properties are already deed restricted.
Well, that's true, but let's use the nonprofit example because there's also a nonprofit housing developer that is getting funds for preservation of their properties.
Okay. And are those properties deed restricted?
No, not to my knowledge. But if they were deed restricted to low income, then that would be enough. I think the concern is enforcing the purpose for which the funds are being allocated and requiring that there's a way to get back the funds or to enforce the funds.
Yeah, I think, Gene, we might want to take this one offline and you and I have a conversation as a follow-up because it sounds complicated. I'd like to dig into the details a little bit more. Is that okay?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, all right, let's do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Gene, thanks.
That was Susan. Sorry, Susan. All right. Next we have Gene Dilios. Gene, do you want to let us know where you're from and what your question is?
Thank you. Yes, Jean Delios. I'm fairly new to the role of CPC coordinator with the city of Beverly. So I just finished about my first month. And one of the questions that came up on a recent project with Habitat for Humanity, this is community housing. And Habitat, you may be familiar with their critical home repair program. And so their application was approved under community housing, under the support and preservation.
This might be a good time to try out the editing.
So now we're thinking about this. They're going to be relatively small-ish projects for low and moderate income homeowners to do these critical repairs. And I believe there's other Habitat for Humanity similar programs with CPC money out there, but I haven't connected with that yet. But my question has to do with how do we capture the affordable housing restriction and what's the best practice on that?
Yeah, Gene, that doesn't sound like an eligible project to me. Giving grants to, that's rehabilitation of an existing affordable housing unit. So that's kind of covered by what we talked about and on the allowable uses chart. If you're calling that support, you're kind of verb shopping there a little bit, right? Support does not include, why would the legislature have put a prohibition on rehabilitating existing affordable housing units if you could just pick a different verb and call it support? So, a lot of times we get questions of folks, who want to start home repair, emergency critical home repair grant programs for people with low income. But those are usually not eligible for CPA funding when you're rehabilitating existing affordable housing units.
I thought we were looking at the preservation of it, where in a lot of cases it's going to be senior citizens that don't have the ability to do these critical, like a roof or, smallish kinds of things. That was my understanding that would qualify under preservation of affordable housing.
Yeah, it might. Some limited things might fall under preservation. But preservation of a privately owned property, you don't have any control over the deed. Does the city own the deed restriction or does Habitat own the deed restriction?
I'm not sure exactly if there's a deed restriction. I don't think that there is.
Yeah, so if it's not a deed restricted, it's not affordable housing. But Habitat is affordable housing. So that's the thing I think you need to dig into, Gene.
Okay.
What type of restriction is on these properties? And who holds that restriction? It might be that the city holds that restriction already. And they're dedicated to affordable housing, and then you want to do those limited preservation pieces. they're not, rehabilitation.
Yep.
That's the issue. I mean, normally preservation activities, even if they're limited, are usually on publicly owned housing. I see very, very few examples of preservation on privately owned housing. It's so hard to ensure that's to the public benefit.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Gene. Next, we have Susan Powell. Susan, be able to unmute and ask your question. Let us know where you're from.
Hello, I'm Susan Powell. I am a CPC member at large in the community of Norwell. And Stuart, thank you so much. Just an excellent presentation, very informative. I've been on the committee for 3 years and I'm still learning.
It's a lot. There's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
So one of the areas that often we spend an awful lot of time discussing in our CPC meetings is trying to define maintenance versus rehabilitation. It becomes very, very tricky. And despite reading the DOR definition, it still often is not clear. So, for example, resurfacing a playground. I mean, is that a capital investment? Is that maintenance? If it's deemed to be unusable, if we didn't resurface it, taking down trees on trails, if it's considered to be making a trail dangerous or unusable, repairing windows on historic buildings, is that rehabilitation, is that maintenance? It becomes very, very difficult, and we have a lot of debate around this area. So I wondered if you could give us some insight and some help, and maybe even a clearer definition.
Right. So this is an ongoing problem, Susan. It's hard, right? Even the CPA definition of maintenance comes from the IRS, and so the IRS has to use that. When people try to deduct things that the IRS might consider maintenance. So it is not easy. You're not alone in this. So the one thing I tell folks is the definition of maintenance is not incredibly helpful. But if it's not maintenance, the opposite is capital improvement. Mm-hmm. And there is a definition of a capital improvement in CPA, and it's really helpful. It's very specific. So what, in asking you something, in asking yourself, is this maintenance? What I would ask you to do is ask yourself, is this a capital improvement? And if it is, you're good to go. If it's not, it's probably maintenance. So that's one way to get at it. Flip the question, look at it from a different angle, try to prove that it's a capital improvement, and then you're good to go. Because if it's not a capital improvement, it's probably not good to go. But it's still not easy. The other thing about maintenance is to look at that activity and say, does this regularly have to be done? And trimming trees on a trail, that is clearly maintenance. I mean, if you don't trim trees on a trail or brush, the trail is going to be gone. You have to maintain your trails, and maintenance is not what CPA is for. It's not for ongoing operating costs. The town needs to have a budget in its conservation department or its recreation department to do tree trimming. What was the other example you gave? Windows?
Well, say, for example, painting windows on a historic building. I mean, the way I look at it is if the windows had been maintained, then we wouldn't need to rehabilitate them.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
that is something that people point out about CPA is you can't do maintenance, but you can rehabilitate.
Yes.
Things. So if you ignore maintenance long enough, it becomes a rehabilitation project.
Exactly.
Right? That is true. People point that out all the time. But I think the reality of that, it sounds like a good soundbite, right? Well, let's just, not maintain it, and then we can use CPA money to rehabilitate it.
End this.
But in the reality, I don't think anyone out there is saying, let's just let